So I haven't particularly got a title for the talk, but in a way the title of the event, Fear to Fearlessness, might as well be the title. And to start off with, just to flummox all those people that have got their notebooks out, we're going to chant to Shakyamuni Buddha, and then we're going to hear a sutta spoken by the Buddha about him describing some of his experience while he was on the quest for enlightenment. And we've got this very beautiful standing rupa of Shakyamuni here, and he's got the fearless mudra. You know, his hand is up, just like steady. There's nothing to fear, it's okay. I mean, sometimes I've heard people say if they've got a connection with either that mudra or a Maitrisiddhi, that sometimes they just feel that hand in the small of their back when they're meditating, just saying, oh look, it's okay. So he's got that fearless mudra, and he's also holding a begging bowl. And the practice of collecting your food in the begging bowl is that you do not pick and choose. So you walk from door to door, and the householders place whatever they place in that bowl, and then you eat it. And in a way, well, in one sense it can be a symbol for contentment. So it's like, that's what's in your bowl, that's what you delight in, that's what you enjoy. But sometimes someone might put something in there that was utterly disgusting, or they might have put two things that really don't go together. And that's what's in your bowl. And so in a larger sense, the begging bowl is a symbol for how life is, where none of us chooses what's in our begging bowl. Life manifests, it arises within us, it arises outside of us. And sometimes what arises is delightful, it's wonderful, it's marvellous. And sometimes what arises is painful, horrific, devastating. And when it looks like what is arising is the unwanted, what we fear, what we really don't want to have happen, that is this territory of fear, like the arising of what is unwanted. And then everything that we as unenlightened beings, thinking of ourselves as fixed, separate selves and imagining the world to be this fixed, solid, I don't know, beings and stuff that somehow we can make do what we want. Fear is the name for what arises when our begging bowl holds what we don't want, or when someone's reaching over to put into it. It's about to happen, it's just about to happen. And we're like, I don't want that in my begging bowl. You get out of my begging bowl. But actually, with the begging bowl of life, we don't have that option very often. So we'll chant to Shakyamuni, bearing in mind this holding of the begging bowl. And Shakyamuni holds that bowl with total equanimity and metta. And his hand is in the fearless mudra, saying, it's okay, whatever arises in the begging bowl. Now that doesn't mean it's okay in terms of like what's happening is okay, but it's more like, how do we relate to that where we are okay with it? So I'll unpack this further. So let's go with the chanting, and then, as I say, I'll read this sutta. So this is the Attadanda Sutta from the Sutta Nipata. Fear results from resorting to violence. Just look at how people quarrel and fight. But let me tell you now of the kind of dismay and terror that I have felt. Seeing people struggling, like fish writhing in shallow water, with enmity against one another, I became afraid. At one time, I had wanted to find some place where I could take shelter, but I never saw any such place. There is nothing in this world that is solid at base, and not a part of it that is changeless. I had seen them all trapped in mutual conflict, and that is why I had felt so repelled. But then I noticed something buried deep in their hearts. It was, I could just make it out, a dart. It is a dart that makes its victims run all over the place. But once it has been pulled out, all that running is finished. And so is the exhaustion that comes with it. These are the things that we can learn from this. The bonds of the world should not be pursued. Disenchanted with all sense pleasures, one should train oneself in calmness. Okay, so as is usual when I'm giving a talk, I've probably got about 3 hours worth of material. But don't worry, I won't talk for 3 hours. Today I'm going to be particularly unpacking the area around the inner dynamics of fear. Like, what are those mental states? What exactly is the nature of fear? What's the nature of anxiety? What's the difference? And how can we work with them? It's interesting, that work with them. It's like, you could think about it as how do we work with them, but also I think when we get a sense more clearly of what it is we're meeting or what it is we're dealing with, then it's like, how does our relationship to those experiences of fear and anxiety, how does that change? So I'll be looking more about like the inner aspect, and then tomorrow Vajratara is going to be looking more at the society aspect and the engagement aspect, you know, like how do we live in the world as it is today. So. I think what quite often happens for me at the start of a talk is I just feel like I'm trying to express something that's beyond the level of my being. And then to start off with, I just come up against like, I'm not going to be able to explain this, am I? But never mind. Let's just try it anyway and see what happens. Yeah. Okay then. So I really love that Atadanda Sutta, because so often, you know, after the Buddha's enlightened, it feels like he's speaking from a mountaintop where it's like fear doesn't arise, or, you know, like metta is totally unclouded and nothing would ever rock his metta or make him frightened. So, you know, you've got Nalagiri, the charging elephant, and, you know, that's been let out of her cage by Devadatta to try to squash the Buddha. And everyone's going, oh my goodness, the mad elephant is out. And it's probably like climbing up trees and, you know, making for the hills and all the rest of it. And the Buddha's just calmly walking along the road with this crazed elephant in rut charging towards him. And hasn't got that response, which is, I need to protect myself. I need to push this away. I'm not okay with this happening. And if you remember the story, what the Buddha does is he envelops Nalagiri with a mind of metta. He radiates metta towards this enraged great elephant. And Nalagiri just calms down, slows to a walk, walks slowly up to the Buddha, and then takes some dust from the feet of the Buddha and puts it on her own head, and then she walks back to the stables. So it's a really gorgeous story, and somehow when I'm frightened of something, it never quite looks like that. Whereas when I read the Atadanda Sutta, I think much more like, oh yes, that is what it looks like for me. That is what fear feels like for me. So we've got the Buddha seeing people struggling like fish, writhing in shallow water, with enmity, with ill will towards each other. I became afraid. So you've got this really evocative image. And I don't know if you've ever actually seen this when a river is drying up. Or sometimes you see it when it's like a pond, and actually when it's tadpoles, I think it's more like I've seen it. And the water just evaporates and evaporates, and there's less and less water. And in the end, the fish or the tadpoles, they're just all sort of like flopping all over each other in a state. And of course, they're frightened. Their existence is threatened. And when unenlightened beings are threatened, they become angry and aggressive and violent. So an angry, aggressive person is a terrified person. And so these fish are fighting each other for the water that's evaporating. And the Buddha doesn't live in some sort of ideal time, which, you know, you might think sometimes, where it's just like he just sort of walks around and says 2 words to somebody and they just go, ping, I'm enlightened now. Actually, there was a lot of warfare at that time. There was a lot of suffering, death, disease, and tribal warfare, which does come up quite a lot in the Pali Suttas. So he was looking at that in his society and saying, seeing this, I became afraid. So let's just look at what this experience of fear is. And then we'll go on to trying to find some place to take shelter. So what's quite interesting about fear and anxiety is how little it gets mentioned in traditional Buddhist texts. And it's not that it doesn't get mentioned, I mean it definitely does get mentioned, but things like craving or ill will get mentioned a lot more frequently. So an example of this is the Abhidharma, the Yogacara Abhidharma's 51 mental events that Bhante does a commentary on in Know Your Mind. Know Your Mind, such a fantastic book. If you haven't read Know Your Mind, get Know Your Mind. And so there's 51 mental events. It's elucidating all these kind of like really obscure mental events, but it doesn't have fear anywhere mentioned. And you're just like, what? Why not? So you definitely do get it in the Pali Canon. So for instance, we've got another classic bit of the Buddha where it's, again, before he's enlightened and he's meditating in the woods. So he dwelt in such awe-inspiring, horrifying abodes as orchard shrines, woodland shrines and tree shrines. They sound rather nice, don't they? I'd like to meditate there. And while I dwelt there, a wild animal would come up to me, or a peacock would knock off a branch, or the wind would rustle the leaves. I thought, what now if this is the fear and dread coming? I thought, why do I dwell always expecting fear and dread? What if I subdue that fear and dread while keeping the same posture I am in when it comes upon me? So what's interesting there is how different the fear is that are the fears now. Because if we were meditating in an orchard shrine and a wild animal came up to us, we'd probably be hugely excited and want to take a photo. Whereas where the threat comes from us probably isn't really the natural world in that way. It's more like the loss of the natural world. And the fear is more around what humans who are unenlightened, who are in the grip of greed, hatred and delusion, as we are, what they do to each other and to the natural world. But we do have an example in there of, he says, "And while I dwelt there, a wild animal will come to me and a peacock would knock off a branch. What now if this is the fear and dread coming?" So he's actually fearing the arrival of fear and dread. So let's just have a look at what fear actually is, given that the 51 mental events don't tell us. So I tried looking up on online dictionaries and it was singularly unhelpful. So it says things like an unpleasant emotion caused by the threat of danger, pain or harm. Well, yes, but what sort of unpleasant emotion? You know, like what's going on there? So this is my reflections. So I would say fear contains all three of the poisons at the hub of the wheel of life. So first, and probably most fundamentally for fear, we've got ignorance. And I'm going to come back to this in a bigger way, but it's like the ignorance that thinks, it believes that we can control what arises. And believes that we can finally and ultimately establish a world where what we like happens and what we don't like doesn't happen. And this is just not how things are. This is really just not how things are. Then it also includes aversion and ill will. It's like we don't want the unwelcome thing. And because we're trying to protect this sense of me, we're forever having to push out of our begging bowl things that we don't want. So Subhuti's got this great phrase, we are a fragile ego in a sea of threat. And we're just trying to push away what feels threatening. And then there's also craving, like this deep inner drive just to pull stuff towards us where we're going to have a safe place or we're going to have a desired world. And that's going to be possible. So you could say fear contains craving for an alternative reality, a world in which what's happening isn't happening. So I came up with a definition along the lines of the Abhidharma. So how about an expectation or imagining that a certain thing may arise, along with very strong aversion to it and a desire for an alternative outcome. Its function is to produce action. So the idea is you do something about it, so you get rid of the unpleasant thing that's going to happen. Now, there's other aspects to fear as well. So one definitely is this imagination aspect. So there's always an imagination aspect to fear. Now, in modern psychology, they make a difference between fear and anxiety. So what modern psychology would say is that fear is about something that's immediate and it's distinct and it's quite kind of concrete and it's, they say, in the present. So say the marquee started falling down on us, that would be quite a distinct, I'm going to get squashed by a big pole, I need to do something about this. Or say, I don't know, we had some crazy gunman turn up and appear in that doorway with an AK-47, we would feel quite a lot of fear, wouldn't we? But it would be a very sort of concrete fear. And its function is that you do something about it. It's like it's urgent, you act. And you either freeze, you fight, or you run, you do flight. And you can see how that's quite sensible, actually. So you do want to do that in that sort of situation. But then they would say anxiety is more like it's future-based, it's diffuse, the threat is vague, bad things are happening, but it's not clear what sort of action one should take. And even if you do the action, you can't really see that that action is going to affect the threat. And so anxiety persists as this sort of ongoing unease. So you're feeling sort of vaguely unsafe all the time and like you ought to do something about it, but you just don't quite know what. And even if you do the thing, the threat is so diffuse that there's not a lot you can do about it in that sense. Now, thinking about it, I think, so I'm going to make a bit of a distinction between fear and anxiety, which is, okay, so I would say that even fear is still always future-based. Because actually, when something's in the middle of happening, usually you just go completely calm. It's just happening. You're not producing resistance to it, and you're dealing with it. You're doing whatever you do. The fear arises before, and then it can also arise after, when you realise just how terrifying and threatening that situation was. So fear always involves the future, whether it's the immediate future or whether it's the wider future. And it always has an imagination aspect to it. We are always imagining the thing that's going to be happening next. Now, sometimes that imagining is totally helpful. Like if your car breaks down in the fast lane of a motorway, you imagine what may happen next, and that means you get out of that car damn quick. So it's not that the imagination aspect is unhelpful always. But then sometimes, or in fact, certainly in my experience, often, the imagination aspect takes over. And then it looks like imagining difficult, desolate futures, or it's like catastrophizing, you know, on the personal level. I don't know, we might just suddenly find ourselves having this whole really detailed fantasy about how our partner's going to get ill and die, and they're in perfectly good health. Or for some reason I get catastrophizing about, I just imagine Taraloka when the whole the whole of society has fallen apart and how it gets kind of populated by bandits and we're all kind of like hiding in the cellars trying to survive on the last bit of lentils from the final sumo delivery. And I can get into a whole sort of like working out, well, what would I do if the neighbours came and asked us and we only had this amount of lentils left in the sumo delivery bag, and what would I do? So this is the nature of catastrophising, where it gets really sort of specific and imaginary. So fear and anxiety, they both have this imagination aspect, which can be either helpful and appropriate, because it helps us decide what sort of actions we should be taking now. Or it can be unhelpful and it can take us to an unnecessarily dark place. Can we spot the difference? So to go back to this difference between fear and anxiety. Oh no, I will just say this thing actually. So fear is not always negative. So you can have a positive fear, like fear of acting unskillfully and seeing what the consequences of that are. Like, oh my God, if I get in that situation, I'm going to yell at that person and I'm going to completely wreck my relationships. So I really need to make sure that I do something, I really need to put them in the Metabhavana consistently for the next 2 weeks so that I can do that meeting well. So fear isn't always unskillful. There can be a positive aspect to fear. And in fact, fear is an aspect of going for refuge. So the nature of going for refuge is you look at where you go for safety. And you look at those refuges and you think, well, is that actually a safe refuge? Is that a safe place? And sometimes you kind of go along to the Buddhist centre, and the first way we'd talk about false refuges would be like, chocolate partners, houses, careers, and all that sort of thing. But certainly for myself, as I go more and more deeply into looking at false refuges, what I see is the false refuge of me. So like my reactions. Am I relying on my anger to keep me safe? Or my craving to, have the perfect bedroom or the perfect house or the perfect tent and outdoor gear if you're me. If I just have the right outdoor gear, everything's going to be okay. Because I'll be able to cope with any weather. And just seeing that my own responses of aversion, so if I get irritated with somebody, that's me going for refuge to my own ill will, my own ability to shove what I don't want out of my experience. And so we see more and more deeply that those aren't effective refuges. But there's also a level to going for refuge where we look at the world and we see that trying to create a fixed, solid world that is always going to stay stable, that is going to maintain us in our lifestyle, where we're always going to be able to go on retreat, where we've got freedom to practice the Dharma, where you can walk down the street and not feel in danger. That is not a safe and reliable refuge. So in the Attadanda Sutta, the Buddha says, at one time I had wanted to find some place where I could take shelter. But I never saw any such place. There is nothing in this world that is solid at base, and not a part of it that is changeless. There's an alternative translation which says, "This world completely lacks essence. It trembles in all directions." So going for refuge also involves seeing where we inappropriately place our security in the world staying in a stable state that we want it to stay in. And if you're someone who's grown up in the UK, probably this is one of the countries that has been most stable over the last 1,000 years. I always notice this, just, you know, even just as simple as going to Europe, that all those countries have liberation dates from the last war. And of course the UK, you know, the last got conquered in 1066, but that was a while back. So it's like one can live with a total sense that world is stable. And it's not. Body is not stable. Don't go there, Maitrisiddhi. Right. So I'm going to come back to that, and I'm going to go back to this, the difference between fear and anxiety. So fear is a much more basic emotion. So it's like fear is much more simple, and it's a very distinct experience, like it's like the whole being sort of narrows and tenses up, and then there's this sort of funny mixture of like wanting what's not happening and trying to shove away what is happening. And it's deeply unpleasant, but it's not complicated. So the distinction that I make with anxiety is what happens when you have fear and unawareness. And when you have fear and unawareness, what happens is proliferative thinking, prapancha. So I would imagine we're all familiar with prapancha. It's like thinking in circles. So this nature of anxiety is, we're just trying to work out, we're having this uncomfortable experience that is fear. The deeply unwelcome is arising in our begging bowl, the begging bowl of our world and our life. And we're not able to stay with that unpleasant experience. And then what happens is, well, catastrophizing, or compulsive trying to work it out, worrying about, well, maybe this will happen, or maybe that will happen, but maybe the other thing will happen, but maybe I should do this, or they definitely ought to do that. So worry takes us into anger and blame. It takes us into compulsive planning. If you ever sit in meditation and you're just compulsively trying to plan things, it's just really interesting to notice, okay, so what's underneath that? It's usually anxiety. So worry or anxiety does come into these 51 positive mental events, not positive mental events. So this is what Sangharakshita has to say about it. So he's saying it's unclassifiable mind, so it's not necessarily positive or negative. So it's positive if one can do something to allay the worry, and it leads one to do something useful and appropriate. It's a spur to appropriate action. If, on the other hand, there is nothing you can do about what you're worried about, or the time has passed for doing anything about it, or if your worry effectively undermines what you are doing to allay it, it is negative, it's anxiety. Then he continues, having done all that one can reasonably do in a given situation, one should be able to sit back and forget all about it. If one finds oneself continuing to worry that something may go wrong, this may be because one hasn't fully accepted the fact that something may go wrong. Sometimes we want more certainty than life by its very nature is able to give. In the end, we feel uncertain because life is uncertain, although we don't want to accept this fact. We can never have complete certainty. We can't be certain beyond all doubt that we will live until lunchtime. All we can do is go on with our life in the absence of any complete certainty. So it's just interesting looking at the different occasions for fear and anxiety. That's me going in two directions. One direction, Maitrisiddhi. So basically, they are mental states. And this means we don't have to have fear and anxiety arise when being presented with something unwelcome. So somewhere or other in these quotes, Bhante says something like, "You are the one factor in this that can change. You are the one factor that can let go of your tight grip on objects." Now, I think that in the society we live in, anxiety is so endemic that actually most people, most of the time, are living with a really, really high level of anxiety. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this. Like, one is there are actually really objective reasons why anxiety would be arising right now. So like political stuff that's going on, ecological stuff that's going on, climate change, mass migrations, dictators with nuclear weapons, war, general instability, it just kind of goes on and on and on. So it's like there's objective reasons why, in a sense, the world right now is terrifying. And yet, because fear is a mental event rooted in ignorance, in not seeing, not going to be able to explain this, it's rooted in ignorance, carry on. So that's one reason, it's objectively terrifying. But another reason is simply to do with how much all the different sciences, including the social sciences, have increased the sense for us that we can be in control. So science is going to fix disease, so we're not going to get ill and die. Well, actually we are. Science is going to work out how to get rid of poverty, so the social sciences. Economics. Someday an economics professor is going to work out how to do the cycle of endless growth so that everybody can be wealthy all the time. And it doesn't happen. Social science, we're going to get the perfect educational way of training our children, and then everybody will be happy forever. And educational theories come and go, and it doesn't happen. Social change, if we can just produce the right sort of social change, if we can just have enough activism, then the world is going to turn into this perfect place where suffering isn't going to happen. So there's a sort of expectation that we're going towards progress, and it's just not true, because what none of those things are seeing is this split with greed, hatred and delusion, with a kind of me in here and a world out there. And then that world being unstable, changing, by the laws of physics and chemistry and biology, but also by the actions of beings who are deluded. And any plan about how to any plan that does not take seeing the nature of reality into consideration, there will simply be cycles where things get better, but then greed, hatred and delusion is still there, and then things get worse, and then things get better, and then things get worse. So what I don't want people to do is think that I'm saying don't take actions. So definitely do the actions, because our actions have an effect in the world. It matters if we step outside the narrowing that is fear and anxiety, and we connect with other beings. It matters that we step outside polarisation. These things matter. We can influence the world around us. We can create. We can bring connection, metta, into the world. And yet we cannot control it all. So in the groups, look at, do you recognise fear and anxiety when it shows up for you? Because so often it can be invisible. You get newsreaders saying things like, so tell us why we should be worried about this. Well, actually, a creative response doesn't have to come from fear and anxiety. So where do we feel fear and where do we feel anxiety? And how do we step out of anxiety and just experience the unpleasantness of fear? And you might want to think about, well, for you, what is the experience of fear? What's that like? And when you're in anxiety, so you've got fear plus unawareness and propantia, what's that like? How do you end up acting? And when you meet somebody in the grip of anxiety and fear, what effect does that have on you? So just thinking about that in your own experience. And then also think about what helps you step out of fear. So how do you bring kindness to yourself in that? Because actually, I think that's where it needs to start for all of us, where it's like you just have to go, actually, it's difficult being an aware human being in the world at this moment. So how to start by holding one's own experience and one's own fear and anxiety in love. And then from that, how does that narrowing where we want to start defending and polarising and going into little groups of these are the nice people and the bad people that are doing it out there. How do we then shift to metta, which means that we are able to open to all different people, even people that are doing things that we feel so distressed by, even devastated by? How do we build connection in our lives and in the world? And God, there's just a lot that I want to say and I'm not going to be able to say it. Never mind. So we've got antidotes, which is awareness, metta, and let's say Shraddha. Now, the reason why Shraddha is so important is because Shraddha is like the shallow end of seeing things directly as they truly are. Shraddha is like the shallow end of insight. And what each of us really needs to be able to meet the difficulty in the world is a sense of the nature of reality as it really is. Which is, it's like, oh no, I'm not going to be able to explain it, never mind. Bansi says, full of anxiety. Most people have no spiritual orientation to their lives, no real clarity. The bodhicitta starts arising when one sees what a mess we are all in. One can't begin to see that until one is a little way out of the mess oneself. But then one does begin to appreciate what a miserable time people have of it. One needs a basis within one's own experience, which is so positive that even though one is fully aware of other people's suffering and one is doing what one can to alleviate it, one is not overwhelmed by that suffering. Now, Bhante talks about needing subjective refuges and objective refuges. And subjective refuges could be my ability to do the practice and produce positive mental states. But sometimes that isn't what's happening. And then what we need is the objective refuges. And those are the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And an objective context we can serve, other people that we can serve, where we're serving values like metta and awareness and clear seeing. Now, I'm not going to be, I just want to be able to explain this wisdom aspect, which is like sort of what you see when faith awakens. So every time I'm really in touch with my yidam, the figure that I took at ordination, which for me is Maitreya, it's like Maitreya is just looking at me and there is just this golden light. And you know, Shakyamuni, you could think of it as Shakyamuni with the fearless hand, and there's golden light coming out. And he's seeing everything that's happening in all the joy, all the delight, all the love, all the kindness and generosity, all the beauty of the hares playing in the field and the bird song, and people coming together to practice the Dharma. And he's seeing all the devastation, the terror, the horrific things that are either happening or may happen. And yet, all that is just being totally flooded with this golden love that is about connection. And it's something about seeing that like suffering does arise. That's the first noble truth. And yet there is a path to that suffering ceasing. And that is the path that we are all on. And when I'm really in touch with that golden light, what happens is I just relax. I stop resisting, seeing that suffering is arising and will arise. And somehow it's just like, well, that just is the nature of unenlightened existence. Suffering does happen, fact. But then when it's held in that level of love, suddenly it's just like, what's important is, can I meet that with love? And can I put all my energy into creating contexts so that other people can meet it with love? And actually that is all that I want to do and all that one can do. So then each of us in your groups thinking, how much do I do that already? So honouring what you are doing, how you are meeting this situation. And then thinking, how could I become more loving? And how could I put more of my energy into connection and to creating situations for love to flourish? Because that is the only thing that can meet fear, and it's the only thing that can meet anxiety. So I'll just finish with a quote from Bhante. So he's talking about Milarepa, and he says, free from samsara, the round of mundane existence, you become free within samsara. So samsara doesn't vanish. You are able to return to the world of suffering without taking that world of distinctions for absolute reality. So Milarepa laughs from intense relief. It is as though, having spent your whole life deeply anxious about something, you suddenly see the truth of the situation, which is that there was never anything to worry about. So how do we hold this, the caring about the world and the letting go? Okay. So we'll go and take tea to groups. So just get yourself a cup of tea, use both tea bars, and then just take your drinks to groups.